This one book has produced more geniuses than any university in history. The Ultra Learning Method. Channel Introduction. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. This is your go-to space for building long-term wealth and living your absolute best life. Because we believe one thing more than anything else here. Your health is your most important form of wealth, and that includes your mental health, your knowledge, and your ability to keep learning and growing. So today, we are diving into something that could genuinely change the way your brain works forever. Video opening. Alright guys, let me start with a story from 2011 that, when I first heard it, I had to stop and read it twice because I could not quite believe it. There was a guy named Scott Young. He was not a prodigy. He did not have a photographic memory. He was not enrolled at MIT. But in 1 year, he completed the entire 4-year MIT computer science curriculum. Not by hacking the system, not by getting special access, but by watching free YouTube videos and using MIT's own free online course materials. The same stuff available to literally anyone with an internet connection. People heard about this and naturally assumed Scott Young must just be unusually brilliant. But then more details started coming out. Within the same period, he learned to paint at a professional level in just 30 days. He became conversational in Spanish in a matter of months. He was not just smart, he had figured out a method, a specific, systematic, reproducible way of learning anything faster and deeper than almost anyone else alive. Eventually, the internet found him, demanded answers, and he wrote it all down in a book called Ultra Learning. And today, we're going to break down every single one of the 9 principles in that book, one by one, in full depth. I want to be real with you. This is not a video about motivation or hustle culture. This is practical, research-backed, example-rich knowledge about how human learning actually works at the highest level. Whether you want to get better at your career, pick up a new skill, learn a language, master an instrument, or finally understand something you have always been curious about. These 9 principles apply to all of it. Let us get into it. Chapter 1. Meta-learning. Learning how to learn before you start learning. The first and arguably most foundational principle in ultra learning is something Scott Young calls meta-learning. And once you understand it, you will never start learning anything the same way again. Here is the idea. All the knowledge that exists in the world, and all the knowledge we personally have, or do not have, can be sorted into 4 categories. And Scott uses a really clean framework to explain this, sometimes called the 4 quadrants of knowledge. The first quadrant is known knowns. These are things you know that you know. You know you can drive a car. You know you can read. You know you can cook scrambled eggs. This is your conscious, accessible skill set. The second quadrant is known unknowns. These are things you know that you do not know. You are fully aware that you cannot speak Japanese. You know you have no idea how to code. You know you have never learned to play an instrument. These gaps are visible to you. The third quadrant is unknown knowns. These are things you actually know, but are so deeply automatic that you have forgotten you know them. Think about tying your shoes. You learned that as a 5-year-old, and now it requires 0 conscious thought. You do not even register it as a skill you possess. Driving is the same. Experienced drivers are processing turns, traffic, speed, mirrors, and dozens of other inputs simultaneously without any of it rising to the level of conscious awareness. The fourth quadrant, and this is the most interesting one, is unknown unknowns. These are things you do not know that you do not know. They are invisible gaps in your knowledge. Think about what a high school student knows about college-level engineering. Before they encounter it, they have no idea that Fourier series exists. They have no idea what a Laplace transform is. Those concepts are not just things they have not learned yet. They are things they do not even know exist as things to be learned. Meta-learning is the process of deliberately shrinking that fourth quadrant. Before you start learning any new subject, Scott Young says you should spend time mapping out what you do not know that you do not know. You do this by scanning the index of a book, watching a few overview videos, talking to people who already have the skill, and asking yourself questions like, what are the concepts here that are completely foreign to me? What would I need to understand to make real progress in this field? What are the prerequisites I do not have yet? Here is an American example. Say you want to learn personal finance and investing for the first time. Instead of just randomly jumping into a Vanguard account or reading a Susie Orman book, A meta learner would first scan the table of contents of a few highly rated books, browse a few introductory YouTube videos, and write down every concept that feels completely unfamiliar. Compound interest, dollar cost averaging, index funds versus actively managed funds, tax-advantaged accounts, asset allocation. Each of those becomes a specific question, and understanding the landscape of questions before you try to answer any of them is what meta-learning is all about. When you have identified 8 to 10 key questions or concepts that define the terrain of what you are about to learn, you have completed the meta-learning phase. Now you are ready to dive in with intention rather than wandering. Chapter 2. Focus. The forgotten superpower in the age of distraction. The second principle is focus. And to explain it, Scott Young shares a story that is both historically remarkable and personally inspiring. In the 18th century, there was a woman named Mary Somerville who had an almost fanatical love of mathematics. At a time when formal education for women in math was not just discouraged but socially forbidden, men studied mathematics. Women were expected to learn sewing and domestic arts. When Mary was a young girl, her aunt visited and caught her reading a math textbook. The aunt was appalled and reported this scandalous behavior to Mary's mother, who then restricted Mary's access to books and formal study as much as possible. But here's where the story gets extraordinary. Mary Somerville found a way around it. She would read a mathematics problem by candlelight late at night when the household was settled. Then her mother would take away the candle because candles were expensive and her math study was considered dangerous. And what did Mary do? She closed her eyes, held the problem in her mind, and solved it in pure mental space, without any paper, any tools, or any light. After she married and had children, she would work through mathematical problems in her mind while she was nursing her baby. Every distraction that came at her, she turned away. Every demand from her social environment that pulled her toward what was expected of her, she politely declined internally and returned to the thing she was building. And the result? Mary Somerville became the first woman ever elected to the Royal Astronomical Society, one of the most prestigious scientific bodies in the world at the time. For Americans in 2024, the parallel is striking. We live in the most distraction-rich environment in human history. Notifications, short-form video, the endless scrollable feed, group chats, email, news alerts. The average American checks their phone over 100 times a day. And every one of those checks is a tax on your focus. The ultra learners Scott profiles in his book shared one consistent trait. They protected their focus with the same ferocity that Mary Somerville protected her study time. They said no to things. They created conditions where the only thing available to them was the thing they were learning. They turned off their phones. They set timers. They worked in library carols and coffee shops and uninteresting rooms specifically because those environments removed the alternatives. The good news is that focus is a skill you can train. Start with 25-minute focused work blocks. No phone, no notifications, no tab switching. Build from there. The research on this, from Cal Newport's work to the science around deep work and deliberate practice, is overwhelmingly consistent. Quality of attention beats quantity of time, every single time. Chapter 3. Directness. Why studying in a classroom and doing the real thing are two different activities. The third principle is directness, and this one has genuinely changed the way I think about skill development. Scott Young tells the story of a man named Vatsal Jaiswal, who moved from India to Canada specifically to pursue his dream of becoming a professional architect. He completed his architecture degree. He applied to dozens of firms. He got rejected everywhere. He had the credentials. He had the degree. But he lacked the portfolio and the real-world exposure that Canadian firms were looking for. And nobody was going to hire him to build that exposure while he was already employed elsewhere. So Vatsal made an unconventional decision. He got a job at a printing shop. Now that sounds like a complete step backward for someone with an architecture degree. But this was a printing shop that happened to cater to architects. The biggest and most established architectural firms in the city would come to this shop to print their blueprints, their floor plans, their design documents. And while Vatsal was processing those print jobs, he was quietly and systematically studying them. He was learning from the best architects in his city for free, in real time, just by being in the room with their actual work. He started building his own portfolio using the techniques and design sensibilities he was observing. Then he applied to 3 firms. All 3 hired him. The principle here is directness. It says that the best way to learn how to do something is to do the thing, or to get as close to the real context of the thing as possible, as quickly as possible, not to study about it theoretically and hope the skills transfer, because they often do not. Here is an American example. If you want to learn how to build an e-commerce business, reading books about entrepreneurship is useful but indirect. A far more direct path is to list something on Etsy or eBay this week. Try to sell something and see what happens. If you want to get better at public speaking, joining Toastmasters or signing up for an open mic night is massively more effective than reading a book about communication theory. If you want to learn to code, building a small app or website you actually care about is better than working through an abstract tutorial for the 100th time. Directness means constantly asking yourself, what is the actual real-world skill I am trying to develop? And how do I get into the environment where that skill is being used as fast as possible? Chapter 4. Drill. Targeting your weakest link until it becomes a strength. The 4th principle is drill. And to illustrate it, Scott Young tells the story of a young Benjamin Franklin who desperately wanted to become a writer. There was just one problem. His writing was objectively bad. The people who read it would lose interest quickly, find it boring, and put it down. Even people who liked him personally could not get through his essays. At the time, Franklin was an avid reader of a magazine called The Spectator, one of the most respected literary publications of the era. He noticed that the writing in The Spectator was genuinely compelling. The way the authors structured their arguments, built tension, chose their words, and guided the reader through ideas was dramatically better than anything he was producing. So Franklin invented a practice. He would read one essay from The Spectator carefully. Then he would close the magazine and try to write the same essay from memory, in the same style, capturing the same flow and structure and tone, using only his own words. Then he would compare what he had written to the original and identify exactly where his version had failed. Where had he lost the rhythm? Where had his vocabulary fallen flat? Where had the logic become muddy? He drilled this specific weakness. Writing style, not grammar, not vocabulary in isolation, not topic knowledge, the specific thing that was holding him back. Eventually, Franklin submitted a piece to his brother's printing company under a fictional name because he was too afraid of rejection to put his own name on it. The piece was accepted. The writing had crossed the threshold from something nobody wanted to read to something a major publication was willing to publish. All through deliberate, targeted drilling of the specific weakness. For most people, the natural tendency is the opposite of drilling. We naturally gravitate toward practicing the things we're already good at because it feels good and confirms our existing self-image. If you are a great communicator but a weak analyst, you will naturally lean into communication tasks and quietly avoid rigorous analysis. But it is exactly the analytical weakness that is capping your career ceiling. Ultra learning says you have to flip this. You have to identify the single weakest link in the chain of your target skill and drill it specifically and relentlessly until it is no longer the weakest link. Then find the new weakest link and drill that. Chapter 5. Retrieval. Testing yourself before you feel ready. The 5th principle is retrieval, and this one runs completely counter to how most of us were taught to study in school. The traditional school model looks like this. Spend a full semester absorbing content through classes and textbooks, then take one high-stakes exam at the end. But Scott Young argues, and the science strongly backs him up, that this is nearly the worst possible structure for actually retaining and mastering knowledge. The research on this, particularly from psychologists studying memory, is remarkably consistent. Testing yourself on material, retrieving it from memory rather than passively reviewing it, is far more effective at building long-term retention than reading or rereading the same material. Here is why this matters. When you try to retrieve something from memory and find that you cannot quite do it, your brain treats that gap as important information. It marks that concept as something that needs to be strengthened. The struggle of retrieval, even when you fail, does more to cement the knowledge than rereading the passage where it appeared. Think about how a great lawyer prepares for trial. They do not just reread their notes and case files the night before. They moot court. which means they have colleagues throw questions at them and practice their responses out loud, in real time. Or think about how elite military units train. They do not read manuals. They run drills under simulated conditions, where the retrieval of procedures and protocols is practiced under stress, before the real situation demands it. For everyday learning, this principle means you should be quizzing yourself early and often. If you are learning a programming language, build a small project before you feel fully ready. If you are learning investing concepts, try explaining them to someone else without looking at your notes. If you are learning a new language, try speaking it with a native speaker far earlier than feels comfortable. The discomfort of retrieval is the signal that learning is actually happening. Chapter 6. Feedback. The thing most people avoid and why that is destroying their growth. Principle number 6 is feedback. And Scott Young opens this section with a story that made me laugh because of how painfully relatable it is. He says he suggested to a friend that they both go get a blood test done as part of an annual health check, and the friend flat out refused. The reasoning? If I get a blood test and something comes back abnormal, I will just stress out about it. Better not to know. Now intellectually, we all recognize that this logic is absurd. Not knowing does not make the problem go away. It just makes you unequipped to deal with it. And yet, when it comes to feedback on our skills, our work, our performance, most of us operate with exactly the same avoidance instinct. We do not want to hear that our business plan has a fatal flaw. We do not want to hear that our writing is unclear. We do not want to hear that our presentation style is losing the audience in the third slide. We avoid the feedback because it is uncomfortable, which means we also avoid the information we most urgently need to grow. Scott Young makes an important distinction here between positive feedback and negative feedback. Positive feedback tells you what you are doing right. Negative feedback tells you what you are doing wrong. And counterintuitively, it is the negative feedback that is far more valuable. If someone tells you that your pitch deck is great, you have learned almost nothing actionable. But if someone tells you that your financial projections are unclear and your value proposition is not landing, you have been given a precise map to improvement. For Americans building careers or businesses, think about this in practical terms. Amazon reviews are more instructive than 5-star reviews. Sales call recordings that went badly are more educational than the ones that went well. The performance review, where your manager identifies your blind spots, is more valuable than the one where everything is positive. The ultra learner actively seeks negative feedback and compresses the time between doing something and getting a clear read on whether it worked. Short feedback loops are not just nice to have. They are the core mechanism by which real skill develops. Chapter 7. Retention. What you do not use, you lose. The 7th principle is retention, and the story Scott uses here is one of the most surprising in the book. Nigel Richards is an English-speaking man who has won the English Scrabble World Championship multiple times. That is remarkable on its own. But then in 2015, Nigel Richards won the French Scrabble World Championship. A native English speaker with no ability to speak French conversationally won the highest level French Scrabble competition in the world. How? By memorizing the French Scrabble dictionary, every legal French word, in 9 weeks. When researchers and journalists try to figure out how Nigel learns and retains things the way he does, they all eventually arrived at the same answer: repetition, precision, and relentless consistency. He does not just practice. He practices the exact things he needs to get perfect, exactly as many times as they need to be practiced to become reliable. This points to a fundamental truth about human memory that most people try to work around rather than work with. Forgetting is the default state of the human brain. We forget almost everything we learn, and we forget it quickly, unless we deliberately re-expose ourselves to it at the right intervals. In psychology, this is described by what is called the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve, named after 19th century German psychologist Hermann Ebbinghaus. The curve shows that within 24 hours of learning something new, we forget roughly half of it. Within a week, we have forgotten most of what we learned. But the curve also shows that each time you review or retrieve the information at the right interval, the forgetting curve for that piece of information flattens. Your brain decides the information is worth keeping because you keep coming back to it. Practical application for Americans. If you are learning to code, Practice every day, even if it is just 20 minutes. If you are studying for the CFA or CPA or any other professional certification, space out your review sessions deliberately instead of cramming the night before. If you are learning a new language on Duolingo, the streak is not just gamification. It is a retention mechanism forcing you to review daily. And the broader life principle here is profound. You cannot build mastery in something and then abandon it for 6 months and expect to come back at the same level. Whether it is a physical skill like playing guitar or swimming, or a mental skill like calculus or a programming language, use it or lose it is not a cliche. It is neuroscience. Chapter 8. Intuition, the deep knowing that only comes from doing. The 8th principle is intuition. And to explain it, Scott Young introduces us to Richard Feynman, who is not just one of the greatest physicists who ever lived, but also one of the most interesting human beings who ever lived. Feynman's intuition in mathematics and physics was so extraordinary that it routinely shocked even other world-class scientists. There's a story about a graduate-level mathematics exam that was so difficult. The median score was literally 0. Most students who took it received negative scores, meaning they lost more points from wrong answers than they gained from right ones. Feynman took that exam. He finished in half the allotted time. He scored first place, and his score was so far above the combined scores of the second, third, and fourth place finishers that it is nearly incomprehensible. Not marginally higher, incomprehensibly higher. When people asked Feynman how he approached problems, he would often say that he just looked at a problem and knew which direction to go, even before he had consciously worked out the steps. That is intuition in the deepest sense of the word, not a guess. A deeply trained sense of how a system behaves, built up over thousands of hours of working with it and receiving rapid feedback from every attempt. The connection between feedback and intuition is direct. Intuition in any field develops when your feedback loop is short and honest. When you do something, quickly find out whether it worked, immediately correct course, and do it again, over and over and over. Chess grandmasters have played so many games and received such clear feedback on each move, in the form of either winning or losing positions, that they have built an intuition for the board that allows them to evaluate positions at a glance rather than calculating every possible sequence. The absence of feedback, or a long delay between action and feedback, prevents intuition from forming. If you make a business decision today, but do not find out whether it worked for 6 months, your brain cannot form the tight cause and effect associations that become intuition. Shorten the feedback loop, and you accelerate not just your learning, but your intuition. Chapter 9. Experimentation. Borrowing from other fields to become exceptional in your own. The 9th and final principle is experimentation, and this is the one that ties everything else together in a way that leads to genuinely original achievement. Here is a quick example that Scott uses to illustrate the principle. What is 112 squared? It is 12,544. What is 52 squared? It is 2,704. Now you might think those were answers that had to be memorized or calculated the traditional way. But they were computed using Vedic mathematics, an ancient Indian mathematical system that uses completely different algorithms than the Western arithmetic methods most Americans learn in school. When students first encounter Vedic math, the new method feels slower than what they already know. It requires more mental effort up front. Some students give up and go back to familiar methods because those methods feel more comfortable, even if the new one would eventually be faster. But the students who push through the discomfort discover that they have added an entirely new tool to their mental toolkit. They do not replace their old approach. They supplement it and become more capable in the process. The broader principle here is this: every field you study, every skill you observe in someone else, every method you experiment with, adds a new lens through which you can see your own domain. And the people who become truly exceptional in any field are almost never the ones who only ever did things the conventional way. The classic example of this in sports is Arnold Schwarzenegger. At his peak as a bodybuilder, before his first Mr. Olympia title, Schwarzenegger was already considered one of the best in the world. But he still went to study with a ballet dancer to learn about posing and movement aesthetics, because he recognized that a completely different discipline might have something to teach him about presenting his physique at its best. And he was right. That experimentation made him a more complete competitor. Here is what this looks like practically for Americans. If you are a software engineer, studying design and user psychology will make you a dramatically better engineer than another 3 months of coding practice. If you are in sales, studying behavioral economics and storytelling will make you far more effective than another sales training seminar. If you are a writer, studying how filmmakers structure narratives will give you tools that no writing workshop will provide. Experimentation means deliberately going outside your current toolkit, learning methods that do not feel immediately relevant, and returning to your primary domain with new capacities. The people who resist this, who say, "I do not want to study other approaches because I might lose my own style," are the ones who stop growing. The people who embrace it are the ones who compound. Summary: Ultra Learning is ultimately one of the most empowering books you can read right now, because it makes a deeply credible case that the ability to learn anything at a deep and genuine level is a system you can acquire and apply rather than a talent you either have or do not have. Scott Young's 9 principles work together as an integrated framework. Start with meta-learning to map what you do not yet know exists. Protect your focus ruthlessly against the noise of modern life. Practice directness by getting into the real context of the skill as fast as possible. Drill your weaknesses with the same ferocity that great athletes train their technical gaps. Test yourself through retrieval early and often before you feel ready. Seek negative feedback aggressively and compress the loop between action and information. Build retention through consistent spacing and practice, because forgetting is the default and the only antidote is repetition. Develop intuition by shortening feedback cycles until your pattern recognition becomes automatic. And experiment constantly across adjacent disciplines, because the most exceptional people in any field are almost always pulling insights from everywhere else. The book does not promise overnight transformation. It promises that if you apply these principles with consistency and honesty about your own weaknesses, you will learn faster, retain more, and reach higher levels of skill than you ever thought possible. End credits and sign off. All right, guys, that is the full breakdown of all 9 Ultra Learning principles, one by one. I genuinely hope this gave you something you can apply, starting today, not next week. Here is the challenge I want to leave you with. Pick one thing you have been meaning to learn, a skill, a subject, a language, anything. Then spend just 30 minutes on the meta-learning phase. Scan the landscape, identify your unknown unknowns, and write down 8 to 10 questions you need to be able to answer. Then get to work. Drop a comment below and tell me what skill you are going to apply Ultra Learning to. I read every single comment, and I would genuinely love to hear what you are working on. If this video added something to your thinking today, please hit that like button. It takes 2 seconds, and it helps this channel reach more people who want to keep growing. And if you are not subscribed yet, go ahead and subscribe right now, and hit the bell so you get notified every time we drop a new video. Share this one with someone who is committed to improving themselves, a friend, a sibling, a colleague who is always looking for an edge. This kind of knowledge compounds, and the best way to retain what you just learned is to teach it to someone else. Remember, your health is your first wealth. Your learning ability is your greatest long-term competitive advantage, and both are things you build deliberately, one day at a time. I will see you in the next one. Thank you so much for watching.